Before we get started, I do have to give a spoiler warning because for some reason there is a subset of people who click on videos for things they haven't watched and then complain when something is ruined for them. I don't really get it, but, Darwinism. We gotta address it right here. Survival of the fittest and all that. Before we get into this, Jill is here with me. I have given you a spoiler warning for WandaVision. We're going to be talking about it today. And if you like what you see here, please be sure to subscribe and leave a like. We really appreciate it. Now, WandaVision uses incredible storytelling and an episodic format to deliver a very interesting narrative every single week. This show, it takes place in the MCU, and it has many different twists and turns to surprise viewers every episode, and it actually keeps them guessing to what's happening. You ask yourself questions: who's pulling the strings on this show? Where will things go? What characters will actually show up, and who are they really? But with how interesting this universe is being made with WandaVision, and how much they're getting into and expanding on in the MCU with this show format, it also does highlight one of the biggest problems with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I would say storytelling in movies in general when they're connected, which is really being able to tell stories and develop characters over time in a universe. And we'll get into that here today. Jill's actually with me, so this is going to be pretty fun.
It's me.
It is you. Hello.
Yeah.
You're like Golden Freddy. Here's the thing. WandaVision really does use each week's episode to introduce new themes and ideas while reinforcing the old ones. And we do have some examples about that too, as well, like for specific episodes and things that they're able to do.
Yeah, like in episode 1 and 2, everything was very idyllic with the 50s and 60s, and everything is happy and silly. But at the end of episode 2, the world sort of changes to more dark elements of the show, and the whole thing is in color again, which I thought was interesting because it kind of went from black and white, which is like a darker tone, to being in color, which is like a lighter sort of tone. But the whole plot line kind of changed from the opposite, like going from light and funny to being a lot darker and more intense.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too. I mean, it was a little ironic, but it also helped show sort of Wanda's world coming alive, and there's these more dark elements starting to be introduced into the show at that point, which I think is really interesting in how that contrasts the color. You also did point out to me something too, which is that the audience is able to actually maintain interest longer. Now, people like you and me, we actually don't like watching things week to week. It's kind of frustrating because you have to wait every single week. Sometimes you forget some of what happens. You don't want to have to rewatch every previous episode or something right when you go to it. We prefer things to be done. But this episodic format does help with that, actually, which I think you wanted to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, it makes it so people are more hyped up, and the show feels a lot more suspenseful, and it keeps the audience interested for a lot longer, because like the show's already released 7 episodes now, and the hype hasn't died down for over a month, whereas with movies, they'll sort of stop talking about it after only just a couple weeks.
Yeah, there's like an initial push.
Yeah.
I remember that with Infinity War too. Marvel actually has been working on that too, which is interesting. They've been, especially with something like Spider-Man Far From Home, they tried, releasing a version of the movie after with an additional like 5 or 6 minutes. But still, it's different than this. This is like 25, 30 minutes of new content every week. And so it keeps people talking week to week, like what's going to happen next week? What is going on? What do these things mean? Like you said, it's over a month in. I think that a good example of this too is actually episode 5 of this show. So episode 5 is where I would say things start to get a little serious at the beginning of episode 3. But episode 4 and 5 are really where they pick up in terms of serious themes and getting into the background of what's going on in WandaVision. And there's a really big argument between Wanda and Vision. It's starting to strain their relationship, and you're starting to see that. And it's interesting because you wouldn't see this as well in a movie, first off. I mean, we talked about Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man. That was masterfully done over a decade. You had to have this multiple movies come out over a decade to fully flesh out this character and see him develop from movie to movie, because there's a lot of off-screen time between each one. I mean, when he first shows up, it is years later when something like Infinity War is taking place. But if you really watch, all the movies he's in, it's probably only like 12 hours of content later. which is interesting.
Yeah, and with this, like with a TV show format, it makes it so the pacing of their relationship and then fleshing out the character is a lot more in depth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because you have these arguments and these discussions and things that take place over time.
And you get to see more rather than just guessing what's going on between. Because you get to see them, you know, in their daily life.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think this does the best is day-to-day stuff versus time skips. I do think to get into this example, I guess, a little more, when they're having this argument, Wanda and Vision, Quicksilver actually shows up at the end of that episode. It's Pietro Maximoff. What's really surprising, though, and I knew this was going to happen, Jill didn't, because, like, I had seen this online. I don't really care. People purposely spoil stuff online because they're dicks. You know, when you don't have friends, you got to find some way to entertain yourself, so I get it. But it is interesting because I think our reactions to it were very different. I knew it was going to happen. I was still surprised. But when you saw the X-Men actor...
I was very shook and excited.
Yeah.
Because I knew you were wanting that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, look, he got what he wanted. My puppy got what he wanted.
I still don't know if we'll actually get what I really wanted, which was for this to be the X-Men Quicksilver from another universe. I still think this is Mephisto, which we'll talk about a little bit. But... yeah, it was really surprising. It was a little bit like a scene that was recently in Star Wars The Mandalorian in Season 2, which you haven't watched, so I'm not going to get too far into this, but they had a really big reveal like this of, somebody showing up and it being such a huge deal for fans, which was leaked all over within 5 minutes. But to have Evan Peters playing Quicksilver in the MCU during this show, it was really interesting how it actually turned out, and it did guarantee viewers to return the following week. And it made the internet run wild with theories, too. Like, for example, like, you and I were talking about it immediately. Is this actually the Evan Peters Fox X-Men Quicksilver, which is actually Peter Maximoff? Like, is it him from Fox, now that they own that? Or is it Mephisto, And there's arguments to support each. Like, for example, a cosmic E level character like Mephisto or Dormammu or any of these guys would be aware of the multiverse. So, like, he would know, oh, there's this other version of Pietro. I'm going to screw with Wanda and pretend to be this guy. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, could it be the devil being a dick? Or could it really be Evan Peters Quicksilver? We don't really know. And it's interesting how you get into stuff with this, not to make it all about this, because this is clearly one of my favorite parts of the show that I could ramble on about, but Evan Peters Quicksilver does seem very in on what's going on. He knows Wanda's controlling things, and also recently a Funko Pop was revealed for him, which, just made me like 99% just ready to go. And it put his name in quotation marks as well, which made the viewer also question, is this really X-Men Quicksilver?
Or if he's really just Quicksilver in general, or if he's somebody completely different.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, it makes you think a lot, this show format, I think more than a movie, because you're waiting for next week to see, am I right? What's going to happen? Is there going to be something that comes out of nowhere that I didn't see? Were there clues to that I missed? Those are things that are a little easier to watch week to week than movie to movie.
Do you want to explain who Mephisto is for your viewers who have no idea who he is?
Oh, yeah. The simplest way, and people are going to say, no, that's Lucifer, but the simplest way to actually explain Mephisto is a demonic entity, a lot like Satan in Christian theology. Essentially evil, cuts deals with people to give them things that they want at a price, or just screws with people in general. Similar in some ways to Dormammu, but they're different characters. Basically, just think of the devil. There's also a lot of, indications that he could be who Evan Peters is controlling. Like, for example, there was an upside-down cross pendant in one of the first episodes, which is usually associated with the satanic, Luciferianism or the satanic occult in real life and in fiction. There also was it wasn't Geraldine. I think it was...
Yeah, it was Geraldine.
No, it was... she was wearing that.
Oh, she was wearing the pendant.
But I think... but Agnes, for example, this is one of Wanda's friends in the show. She mentioned in, I believe, the first episode, it was either 1 or 2, but I think it was 1. She said, the devil is in the details, but that's not the only thing he's in. Mm-hmm. And kind of laughed. And so there were these clues early on, like, oh, maybe there's, a satanic or Mephisto-type element to this show. I mean, I know that we really got into Evan Peters there, but that's just one example of like a really in-depth thing that fans think about week to week that they wouldn't necessarily think about quite as much if there was a 1.5 year gap between this and a continuation of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think also too, you really talked about this. I wasn't thinking about this, but you like how Sword is handled, which is sort of like a version. It's not S.H.I.E.L.D., but it's, I guess, a stand-in for S.H.I.E.L.D. in a way in this.
Very different from Pokemon Sword and Shield, though.
Yeah, but they copied them.
They did. How dare they? But it really goes more in depth with them, I think, rather than just glossing over them, because I think a lot of times in the movies, those sort of like real world elements, I guess, were kind of glossed over.
Like the agent type of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with this, it's feels like a big part of the show.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the most interesting S.H.I.E.L.D. thing at all in the movies was actually in Captain America 2. And it was just finding out that S.H.I.E.L.D. was partially Hydra.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that made it more interesting. But you are right. I don't necessarily find S.H.I.E.L.D. boring in the movies, but they're not that interesting either. They're just kind of there. They were able to tie Sword into the story of this very well.
And I thought they made it a lot more interesting. And plus, adding in Monica Rambeau, I thought, was also a very interesting element.
Yeah, I was surprised to like her.
Yeah, because I didn't expect to like her very much, especially since you didn't like Captain Marvel, the movie, with Brie Larson, and I didn't really either. And Monica kind of becomes Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to say anything.
No, you can. Yeah, I mean, like, there is a... I mean, we gave them a spoiler warning, and we're not even there yet in the show. When we release this, there's 7 episodes out.
Yeah.
So I probably should have mentioned that earlier, but it is what it is. I do think that it's interesting that they are introducing a character who does become Captain Marvel in the comics, and one that people actually seem to connect to more, which was Monica Rambeau. It also does tie an element into Captain Marvel that makes that movie a little more important because she's a little girl in the movie, which is interesting when that movie itself is not the best. I also think it's overhated, but I just don't think it's very good.
Yeah.
You know, it's I guess that's a discussion for another day, but it is an interesting thing. You also pointed out to me that there's always theories and speculation. We did talk a little bit about this already with Evan Peters, but a lot of questions of who's who and what's happening.
Yeah.
So.
And that inspires, I think, a lot more, hype, like we said before, in the fandom and such, instead of having such a long wait in between so much content and everybody kind of getting bored and forgetting about it.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I remember the bottom of the barrel scraping for Infinity War. You might remember this too, but like the fan theory stuff for Infinity War was so bad and boring. It was like, oh, Thanos has this scar on his face. That scar matches up with Wolverine's claw. Are they introducing Wolverine in this movie?
I remember that.
I remember seeing it and I was like, ugh. Like, I get it. Like, I've talked about, like, some pretty low-hanging stuff, too, but holy cow.
I thought my favorite theory was in between Infinity War and Endgame when everyone said that they thought the way they were going to get rid of Thanos was putting AntMan, making him very tiny and climbing up Thanos' butt, and then him growing very big. That was my favorite theory of all time.
That was certainly an option.
I think it was a great option.
It was funny, but yeah, well, that's the thing, though, too, is, like, I think there's a lot more grasping at straws with movies. You know, we saw this, too, with Star Wars. Again, I know you're not a huge Star Wars person yet. Jill's actually kind of getting into it, now that you moved here.
Yeah, we haven't watched any of the movies together yet.
Right, you will. But
Someday.
To throw this out here for the audience, there's a character in Star Wars in the sequel trilogy called Snoke, and he was really hyped up. And it was like, who is he? What matters about him? Blah, blah, blah. And it was for, like 3 years, people like questioned it. And then the answers came out, and they're like, those kind of suck. Like there's a lot more build-up in time, like over specific theories, versus this, which just gets people to stay interested to next week. And if they're wrong, that's a week of thinking something wrong.
Yeah,
it's not 2 years.
Instead of making it feel very, what's the word, like anticlimactic?
Yeah, can you imagine thinking, like, for example, can you imagine the Wolverine thing? Let's say you bought into that right away. Can you imagine thinking for 2 years Wolverine's going to show up in this movie and then he doesn't?
Yeah, and then you'd be super disappointed. And
it's not the movie's fault.
Yeah, it wasn't the movie's fault, but you, as the viewer, kind of felt like it was a waste of your time to go thinking about all of that.
You know what it's like to be a Star Wars fan now, by the way.
That's not what you want your viewers to feel like. You want them to come up with theories and be very interested in what you're making and, grasp at these new ideas.
Yeah.
And have fun being right sometimes.
And I think, too, just like we said about following the daily lives, and I should have mentioned this earlier, but here we are on our outline. I do think that following daily events or even weekly events is a little different than the movies. So Tony Stark appearing in Iron Man 1, there's a time jump between 1 and 2. It doesn't happen right away. Between 2 and Avengers, there's a time jump. Between Avengers and Iron Man 3, there's a bit of a time jump.
There's big time jumps in the Thor movies as well.
Yeah.
And they mention them.
Yeah, there's really big ones. And there's a huge one with Infinity War's ending to the beginning of Endgame. It's 5 years.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I think those work in their own way in the universe, and I think that that's awesome. But we haven't seen something so connected and well done since Daredevil, which was interesting because it was very, daily or weekly, a few days past this happens, few days past this happens. Okay, Wilson Fisk, what's going on with the Kingpin? Oh, we're seeing him develop over time as a person. Same with Matt Murdock. Those things are different in this sort of connected episodic format. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of this comes down to the argument of movies versus TV.
Mm-hmm. But also, when it comes to those time gaps in the movies, you're left kind of wanting to see those things and wanting them to sort of flash back to see what happened in between, and a lot of times you don't get that and you're left desiring more, whereas you don't have to feel like that with these TV shows because they show you everything and you don't have to feel like you're missing out.
Yeah, what's funny? The biggest one I can think of for that as well is actually Thor: The Dark World.
Yeah.
Because there was this whole thing, and by the way, Jill didn't make me say this just because she's a Thor stan. I actually always thought this, I enjoy that movie for what it is. It is one of the weaker Marvel movies. That's fine.
But it was good because Chris Hemsworth was in it.
I think it's fun.
No, it was good because Chris Hemsworth was in it.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. Mr. AntMan. I think that there was a whole thing at the beginning where they show that Thor has been going around with Lady Sif and all these other warriors and Asgardians helping secure the realms and helping to fix things up, but you come in at the tail end on their last mission doing it. You don't get to see any of Thor getting close to those people, or staying close to them or interacting with them.
And those are things I would have loved to have been able to see.
Yeah, like Lady Sif in particular, they build her up like she's really important in the first 2 Thor movies, then she's just kind of gone.
Yeah.
And you kind of are like, why?
I was very disappointed about that.
Yeah. I don't know. That's just an example of what a time jump can kind of do and make you want to see. And why it's really nice to get a version of this without that. Jill, do you have anything else to add to this before I kind of wrap it up at all?
Do you want to mention how you think, the things you thought about Vision with him being a reanimated corpse and thinking that he's not going to survive after all of this?
Yeah, well, that is an interesting point. I don't know if we really want to go too far into it, just because we already talked about, Quicksilver and all the week-to-week stuff. But I do, yeah, that is an interesting thing, too. I think that's something else people are looking forward to is what will happen with the MCU going forward. This seems like it will heavily affect it, almost more than a movie, because Vision's been reanimated. We saw what he looked like with this freaking massive gap in his head from where Thanos tore out his Infinity Stone.
And it would feel weird to bring him back like this and then just kill him off again, too.
I know, it would. It would feel weird, but he can't exist outside of the reality that Wanda's controlling.
Yeah.
So I don't know what they're going to do, really, with this. With Vision, is this sort of a goodbye to Vision? Because we didn't get a big goodbye for him.
And he wasn't in very many movies either.
No.
He didn't really get all that much screen time, it felt like.
Well, that's a good point, too. This does help expand Vision as a character, because even though he doesn't have his memories of before, we're able to get to know him more as a person of who he is.
Yeah.
We're able to more personally know Vision versus just a powerful force who's kind of there a little bit. I would say, too, that this gave his death more weight by letting us see him more. Yeah. Because we know he's dead.
And it makes it more impactful now, because you're like, oh, he's probably not going to survive all of this, and it makes you sad. Yeah. Because you've grown to care about him a lot.
When he probably only had 30 or 45 minutes of screen time total in the MCU before he died.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the problem with killing him off when they did, and how this does help, again, flesh out that universe as a whole. I think that's about all we have.
No, I have a closing thought.
Oh, okay, absolutely.
Elizabeth Olsen is the most beautiful girl in the MCU.
Elizabeth Olsen is a goddess. I agree with you completely.
That's all.
She's worth watching the show alone.
Yes.
So I may or may not have saved gifs of her in her Scarlet Witch costume and the magician costume.
Well, as you should. I mean,
may or may not have.
She looked very good.
She did ravishing, some would say. Yeah, Vision's a lucky guy. So I don't know, that's kind of the whole thing too. This does highlight an issue I think that the movies have. I truly hope that this is a format they keep working with. You know, I really do hope, as much as everyone kind of like memes on Falcon because like he's Falcon, I really hope that Falcon and the Winter Soldier is really good. I hope that we get to sort of see Bucky expanded in the same way that we saw Vision and Wanda.
And hopefully we start to care more about Falcon and his character.
Yes, because like he's just kind of there.
Yeah, right now he's like uninteresting and reminds me of a wet sock.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you know, this is the kind of thing that they need to use this format to expand these characters. And I get that there's some budget constraints probably with like you can't make as much money off of this as a movie, so you have to be careful how much you're doing it.
It helps with them putting it on their own streaming service, though, I think.
It does, but it's still a ton of money to make.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an issue. That's why they spread these episodes out so that you don't just watch them all and cancel in a month. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see definitely what happens. We're very interested in the future of the MCU. I would say you and I both, when we talked before a couple months ago, before watching this, we both said, I'm interested in Thor and Spider-Man, and that's the main things that we were interested in. But now we're like, where's Wanda going to be? What's going to happen with Vision?
Yeah, I'm
like,
super into Wanda now. Yeah. And like, I want to see her more.
Well, and the quality of this, if like Falcon and the Winter Soldier is at this quality,
then we're going to want to see them more.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? And it's going to make us excited for the next movies, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think that at the end of the day, that's what this does the most, is it builds a lot of hype and really helps people stay invested in a new format for this same shared universe.
Yeah.
So anyway, we hope you enjoyed this. Please let us know what you think in the comments down below. Leave a like if you like it. Dislike it if you dislike it. As always, either one helps.
Can I say stay shui?
Oh, yes, you can. Absolutely. Give me a minute, though. I still got to keep going.
Okay.
Be sure to check out the links in the description down below. We have a revamped Patreon with lots of behind-the-scenes stuff that we would appreciate if you check out. But
he posts pics on
No,
there.
I don't. Why does everyone make that joke? Anyways, we hope you have a fantastic day. And as always,
stay shui!